60 years ago, somebody's grandmother was doing something in her backyard that the fancy cooking schools called primitive, that the food safety boards wanted to shut down, and that the neighborhood association tried to report to the city. And she did not care one single bit. She just kept right on cooking because she knew what she knew, and what she knew worked every single time. Today, we are going all the way back to the 1960s, deep into the tradition that kept black families fed, satisfied, and gathered around a pit every single summer weekend. We are talking about 25 barbecue tricks that grandmothers in the black community passed down quietly, whispered at family reunions, and sometimes flat out refused to write down because they did not want everybody knowing their business. These were methods that health inspectors side-eyed, that cookbooks ignored, and that culinary schools called dangerous or unsanitary. But now, in 2026, food scientists, chefs, and flavor researchers are finally catching up and saying what Grandma already knew. Let us start the countdown. Number 25. Cooking with green wood on purpose. Every pitmaster in the 1960s barbecue circuit would tell you never use green wood. Dry, seasoned hardwood only. But Big Mama in her backyard? She would sometimes deliberately throw a chunk of green hickory or green pecan wood onto her coals. Neighbors thought she was either out of charcoal or had lost her mind. What she was actually doing was introducing moisture-laden wood that burns slower and produces a cooler, thicker smoke. This extended smoke penetration into the meat at a lower temperature, allowing the smoke ring to develop deeper and the connective tissue to break down more gradually. The science now confirms that the water content in green wood creates a steam-smoke combination that keeps the cooking chamber humid, which directly prevents the surface of the meat from forming a hard crust too early. That early crust locks out flavor. Green wood prevents it. Grandmama knew. Number 24. Rubbing meat with mustard seed paste before the dry rub. If you brought store-bought yellow mustard to Grandmama Thelma's house, she might use it. But if she was cooking for a real occasion, she was grinding her own mustard seeds, sometimes mixed with a little apple cider vinegar, into a rough paste. She would rub that onto the ribs or the brisket before anything else. People thought it was weird. Some folks refused to eat it because they assumed the meat would taste like mustard. It does not. What that mustard seed paste does is act as a binder that grips the dry rub and holds it against the meat surface during the long cook. But more importantly, the glucose inolates inside the mustard seeds break down under heat and form compounds that actually help tenderize the outer muscle fibers. Modern chefs now call this a flavor foundation, but black grandmamas in Georgia and Mississippi were doing this as standard practice in 1962. Number 23. Letting the meat sit in salted ice water overnight. This was considered dangerous by mid-century food safety standards. Health departments were going around saying that soaking raw pork or chicken in water overnight was a recipe for illness. But this was a deeply rooted practice among black Southern women, often called brining, though nobody called it that in those neighborhoods. Grandmama would dissolve a generous amount of salt, sometimes brown sugar, sometimes a few cloves of garlic, into cold water and let her pork shoulders sit submerged overnight before the morning cook. What she was doing was osmosis. The salt solution draws moisture into the muscle cells, seasoning the meat from the inside out rather than just coating the surface. When that meat hits the heat for 12 hours, it has reserves of moisture to give up slowly, which is exactly why her pulled pork never dried out. Food scientists now call this wet brining and consider it essential for large cuts. Number 22. The vinegar soak overnight. Across the Carolinas and into Virginia, black grandmothers soaked their pork shoulders and ribs in a straight apple cider vinegar or white vinegar bath overnight, sometimes for 12 to 18 hours. Extension offices and food safety pamphlets of the 1960s warned against marinating meat at room temperature overnight, which is where the controversy came in, because many of these women were leaving that meat in a covered bowl on the counter, not in the refrigerator. Science now explains that the acetic acid in vinegar dramatically lowers the pH of the meat surface, creating an environment hostile to harmful bacterial growth. It also begins breaking down collagen in tough cuts, essentially giving you a head start on the long cook. The acid denatures surface proteins, which helps the meat absorb smoke and seasoning more deeply. Use a ratio of 1 cup of vinegar per 2 pounds of meat. Add garlic, black pepper, and red pepper flakes to the soak. Keep it covered, and for food safety, put it in the refrigerator. Number 21. Hickory ash rub. This one genuinely alarmed people. Grandmothers in parts of Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi would save the ash from burned hickory wood, mix it with salt and pepper, and rub it directly into the meat before cooking. Food authorities considered ash a contaminant. But here is the remarkable truth. Hickory ash is highly alkaline and creates a chemical reaction on the surface of meat proteins called the Maillard reaction precursor. The alkaline environment actually speeds up browning and crust formation while adding a mineral-forward smoky flavor that you simply cannot replicate any other way. Mix 2 tablespoons of clean hickory ash with 1 tablespoon of kosher salt and 1 teaspoon of cracked black pepper. Rub it aggressively into your meat 30 minutes before cooking and watch what happens to your bark. Food scientists at universities studying traditional cooking methods have confirmed this technique accelerates crust development significantly. Number 20. Cast iron directly on the coals. Nobody told grandmothers they needed a grate. In many black households during the 1960s, especially in poorer rural communities, a well-seasoned cast iron skillet went directly into the coals for certain cuts, especially chicken pieces and thick pork chops. Fire marshals considered direct coal contact a burn hazard, but cast iron distributes heat so evenly and holds it so intensely that food cooked directly in coals in a covered skillet essentially braises and sears simultaneously. Nestle your covered cast iron into a bed of gray coals, pile a few coals on top of the lid, and cook chicken thighs for 25 minutes. The result is skin that shatters like glass and meat that falls from the bone. Number 19. The buttermilk injection. Before injection needles became a barbecue gadget, grandmothers were doing this with a bulb baster, or sometimes literally just pouring buttermilk into slits cut into the meat with a paring knife. Health codes of the 1960s had issues with any internal meat preparation done outside of commercial kitchens, but buttermilk contains lactic acid, which works similarly to vinegar but more gently, and with the added benefit of fat content that lubricates muscle fibers from the inside out. Cut half-inch slits throughout a pork shoulder or whole chicken. Pour or inject room-temperature buttermilk liberally into those cuts 1 hour before cooking, and the meat will self-baste from the interior throughout the entire cook time. Number 18. Smoke from wet peach pits. In Georgia and South Carolina, black grandmothers with peach trees had a secret that required saving peach pits throughout the summer and soaking them in water overnight before tossing them on the coals. This seemed wasteful and strange to outsiders, but peach pits contain compounds that, when burned under controlled conditions with moisture, present release benzaldehyde, a natural almond cherry smoke flavor compound. The soaking slows the burn and prolongs the smoke output dramatically. Collect and dry peach pits, soak a handful overnight, drain them, and toss them on hot coals about halfway through your cook when you want a subtle, sweet smoke note to develop on the surface of ribs or chicken. Number 17. Collard green smoke lid. This technique was documented by nobody because nobody outside the community was watching closely enough. Grandmothers would lay large, fresh collard green leaves directly over meat on the grill and use them as a living, steaming, flavor-releasing lid. The leaves would char on the outside while releasing moisture and their own distinct vegetable smoke on the inside. The layer trapped heat and created a microclimate above the meat. Lay 4 to 6 large collard leaves overlapping each other over your meat, weigh them down with a piece of foil crimped at the edges, and let them work for the first hour of cooking before removing them. The flavor transfer is subtle but unmistakable. Number 16. Layered under the skin. Before compound butters became a food television staple, black grandmothers were taking rendered lard, mixing it with garlic, onion powder, black pepper, cayenne, and dried thyme, and pushing that mixture under the skin of whole chickens and turkey pieces with their bare hands. Health inspectors in the 1960s had feelings about hands inside poultry, but the technique is flawless. Lard has a higher smoke point than butter, a more neutral yet rich flavor than olive oil, and it renders slowly during cooking, continuously basting the meat from beneath the skin throughout the entire cook. Number 15. Adding whole okra pods to the smoking chamber. Grandmothers would toss fresh or dried okra pods into the smoking chamber alongside their meat. This was considered bizarre and wasteful by anyone watching. Okra contains mucilaginous compounds, a natural thickening agent that, when heated and vaporized in a smoking environment, coats the surface of the meat with a thin, moisture-locking film. This is why meat smoked with okra in the chamber stayed noticeably juicier than meat without it. Researchers studying natural food coatings have since identified these okra vapor compounds as naturally occurring analogs to commercial moisture retention sprays used in industrial food production. Add 4 to 6 whole dried okra pods to your coal bed or wood chip container at the start of your cook. Number 14. Sassafras wood smoke. The FDA restricted sassafras use in commercial foods in 1960 because safrole, a compound in sassafras root bark, was identified as a potential concern in large concentrated quantities. But grandmothers were not processing root bark. They were using dried sassafras branches for smoking meat in small quantities that produce trace aromatic compounds. The flavor produced is unlike anything else, a slightly sweet root beer adjacent, earthy smoke that works beautifully with pork and venison. Use dried sassafras branches, not root bark, and use sparingly, just 1 or 2 small pieces per cook. Number 13. The soda pop mop. During the 1960s, when RC Cola, grape soda, and orange Nehi were staples in black households and corner stores in the community, grandmothers were using flat leftover soda as a mopping liquid applied to meat during cooking. Sugar-heavy mop sauces were considered fire hazards because of flare-ups. But the high sugar content in these sodas, when mopped on during the final 45 minutes of a low and slow cook, creates a lacquered caramelized exterior crust through rapid Maillard reaction and caramelization simultaneously. Use flat RC Cola or grape soda, add a splash of apple cider vinegar and some hot sauce, and mop it on every 15 minutes during the last hour only. The surface will turn deep mahogany. Number 12. Wrapping in banana leaves. In communities with Caribbean and Gulf Coast connections, particularly in Louisiana, Florida, and coastal Georgia, Black grandmothers wrapped whole fish, goat, and pork in banana leaves before placing them over or under coals. Inspectors and neighbors found this unusual and unsanitary looking, but banana leaves impart a subtle floral, grassy flavor compound, act as a natural nonstick surface, and create a sealed steaming environment that keeps even lean proteins from drying out over a long coal cook. Char the banana leaves slightly over a flame first to make them pliable. Wrap your protein completely, tie with kitchen twine, and bury in or place over gray coals. Number 11. The 2-day salt cure. Grandmothers did not just season meat the morning of a cookout. 2 days before, a thick coat of kosher salt went on, and the meat sat uncovered in a cool corner of the kitchen or on a screened porch. Food safety authorities called uncovered meat storage dangerous, but what this creates is a dry brine where salt draws moisture out, dissolves into it, and is then reabsorbed into the muscle fibers, seasoning the meat from the inside out while also drying the surface for better crust formation. Apply 1 teaspoon of kosher salt per pound of meat, coat all surfaces, and refrigerate uncovered on a rack for 48 hours. Number 10. Peanut oil high sear. Before it appeared in fancy restaurant supply catalogs, cold-pressed peanut oil was the cooking fat of choice in black southern kitchens. On the grill, grandmothers used peanut oil to sear certain cuts at extremely high temperatures. Peanut oil's smoke point exceeds 450 degrees Fahrenheit, making it ideal for creating an immediate crust on steaks and chops without burning. Coat your meat lightly in peanut oil before it hits a screaming hot grate, and watch what happens to the exterior in under 90 seconds. Number 9. Hanging meat over the pit. Rather than placing meat on a grate, certain grandmothers in the community used green wood stakes driven into the ground on either side of a pit and hung whole chickens or racks of ribs from wire or cord above the smoke. This suspended the meat in the smoke column rather than over direct radiant heat, producing an incredibly even, all-side smoke penetration. Hang meat at least 18 inches above the coals and rotate it every 30 minutes. Number 8. The onion half grate clean. Before any meat hit the grill, grandmothers cut a large white or yellow onion in half and rubbed the cut side vigorously across the hot grates. Inspectors thought this was unsanitary prep, but onion juice is naturally antimicrobial. The steam released from the cut onion cleansed carbon deposits from the grate, and the sulfur compounds left behind prevent sticking better than any commercial spray. Number 7. Sweet potato ash. Grandmothers buried sweet potatoes in ash at the edge of the fire pit for hours as the main event cooked. The ash surrounding the potato created an oven of perfectly even low heat, but they also used the liquid that seeped from the potato skin as a basting agent. Sweet potato liquid is naturally high in sugars that caramelize at low temperatures and add a sweet, earthy glaze to ribs when applied in the last 30 minutes of cooking. Number 6. The smoke ring prayer method. This is not a cooking technique so much as a cultural practice that had a very real technical function. Before lighting the fire, grandmothers spent time at the pit, sometimes praying, sometimes just sitting quietly with the wood, letting the smoke environment develop slowly from smoldering wood before adding accelerants. This slow pre-smoke development produced cooler, cleaner smoke from the beginning, which means the meat went on in an environment with higher concentrations of carbon monoxide and nitric oxide, the exact gases responsible for creating the coveted pink smoke ring that food scientists now study extensively. Number 5. Charred onion liquid based. Whole onions were placed directly in the coals until completely blackened on the outside. Then the charred outer layers were removed, and the soft, sweet, intensely caramelized interior was squeezed out and mixed with pan drippings to create a basting liquid of remarkable depth. The high-heat Maillard compounds in charred onion add complexity to basted applications that no raw onion preparation can replicate. Number 4. The towel steam rest. After pulling meat from the pit, grandmothers submerged a thick cotton towel in water, wrung it out until damp but not dripping, and wrapped the resting meat in that damp towel before the newspaper wrap went on. This created a controlled steam rest that relaxed the outer crust just enough to allow juices to redistribute through the entire cut without losing the bark. The moisture from the towel never penetrated the outer crust completely. It simply moderated the temperature drop during resting. Number 3. Wood selection by meat color. In the Black community tradition, grandmothers chose their smoking wood specifically to complement the natural color of the meat. Darker meats like beef brisket and goat got hickory and pecan for deep reddish smoke development. Lighter meats like pork shoulder got apple or cherry wood for a rosy finish. Fish got peach or sassafras. This was considered superstition by outsiders. But food scientists now understand that different wood species produce different concentrations of guaiacol and syringol, which are phenolic smoke compounds that interact differently with myoglobin in various proteins to produce specific color and flavor outcomes. Grandmothers knew this not by studying phenols, but by decades of watching, tasting, and adjusting. Number 2. The ice block smoke trick. In communities where ice was accessible from the iceman or an early refrigerator, grandmothers placed a block of ice inside a covered pit or beneath a covered grill during the early stages of a long cook. This sounds counterintuitive, ice in a fire pit. But the ice created a low-temperature, high-humidity environment at the very beginning of the smoke phase when the meat is most porous and most receptive to smoke absorption. Smoke particles penetrate cold, moist surfaces more readily than warm, dry ones. The ice melts slowly over the first hour, gradually allowing the temperature to rise naturally into the cooking range. Place a block of ice on a raised platform above your coals at the start, cover the grill, and let the temperature climb naturally as the ice melts. Number 1. The overnight ember rest. This is the crown jewel. The technique that grandmothers refused to fully explain to outsiders and sometimes kept within specific family lines. After a full day of cooking, when the family had eaten and the coals had burned down to nothing but glowing embers and gray ash, grandmothers would take certain cuts, whole shoulders, brisket sections, large goat legs, and bury them completely in the ash and dying ember bed. They would cover the pit with a sheet of corrugated tin or a heavy piece of plywood weighted with rocks, and they would leave that meat overnight. The next morning, 8 to 12 hours later, they would dig it out. What came out was a meat cooked at an extremely precise, unwavering temperature, somewhere between 160 and 180 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire overnight period, because dying coals and ash maintain exactly that temperature range with remarkable consistency. This is what culinary professionals now call low-temperature extended cooking. It is what modern precision cookers attempt to replicate electronically. Grandmothers did it with ash, instinct, and trust. The collagen in tough cuts converts completely to gelatin at those temperatures over that time period. The result is meat that does not so much fall off the bone as dissolve into something almost spiritual. Wrap your fully cooked but still tough meat in several layers of butcher paper, bury it in the ash bed of a pit you have been cooking in for 6 or more hours, cover the pit completely, and do not touch it until morning. This is not a shortcut. This is the long road that leads somewhere nobody else can follow. If you learned something today that you are going to take to your next cookout, drop it in the comments. And if your grandmother or somebody's grandmother used any of these techniques, I want to hear that story. That knowledge belongs to all of us. Like this video, share it with your people, and we will see you on the next one.